I know. You all want to hear your Kyone Wolf intro, but I couldn't write one for her today because she's still got a cold. And we're all being worn down by this election season. If I had known what this election season was going to be like back in January, I would have gotten on a very complicated psychoactive medication that I'm currently not on. However, it's just another day or so to go, and it'll all be a dark, dark dream. Later in the show, John Dankosky will come in, and he and I will share our dark, dark dreams of this election with you and update you on all kinds of last-minute things, none of which will make you feel very good about your democracy. And then towards the end of the show, Chris Ostendorf, a freelance writer in L.A., he's got a great piece in the Daily Dot about how movie theaters could be a more attractive place for you to go. But we're going to begin with Nicholas Carr. He's been with us before. He writes about technology and culture. He's the author of several books, including The Shallows, a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and currently The Glass Cage, Automation and Us. So we're talking to Nicholas Carr about The Glass Cage. We should say as an equal time issue next week, we're going to have Nicholas Cage on to talk about The Glass Car. It seems only fair. So Nicholas Carr, I'm going to begin with the story in this book that I think comes closest to summing up, if anything could, what we're talking about. And it's not the really terrifying and tragic airline pilot stories, although we certainly get to that. But it's the story of a cruise ship. I believe it's called the Royal Majesty. Tell us about the Royal Majesty and what happened to it.
Well, a number of years ago, the Royal Majesty, which was a cruise ship, was on the last leg of a cruise off New England. It was going from, I think, Bermuda to Boston. And, of course, it had the latest navigation system, computerized navigation system that was hooked up to GPS antenna. And so they left port in Bermuda and turned on the navigation system. And the crew kind of, as people do, had complete faith in the computer to get them to Boston. And what happened is the connection to the GPS antenna broke, and it was, up high where nobody could see it. And so for hours, the ship drifted off course while the crew was still had faith in the computer. And at one point, they were even supposed to go by a locational buoy, and a mate, the second mate or something, was supposed to watch out for it. He didn't see it, but he assumed that the computer must know what it's doing, so he assumed that he must just have missed it and didn't call up to the bridge and let them know that he didn't see it. And eventually, many miles off course, the ship ran aground on a sandbar off of Nantucket.
So who are you going to believe? All this wonderful technology or your own lion eyes? And it's, to me, this sums up at least a big chunk of your premise. It's not simply that because of technological advances, because of our increasing dependence on computer-driven technology to inform us, to answer our questions, to anticipate our needs, that certain of our skills are atrophying, although I think that you make a case that they very well may be. But that in some cases, in defiance of what we see, in defiance of what we know, we simply drop to our knees and acknowledge the superiority of these machines, even when they're not being superior.
That's right. And the people who study this refer to the phenomenon as, it's actually two phenomena. One is automation complacency and the other is automation bias. And essentially it means that when we think a computer is handling stuff for us, it can be anything from, a cruise ship to spell check to a plane, we tune out. We simply put so much faith in the computer that we don't trust our own senses. We don't, watch out for signs and kind of when we space out. And then if something bad happens, we suddenly have to take over and we're disoriented and we tend to make mistakes.
And just back to that spell check issue, I mean, if you need any proof of that, clearly the most frequently made mistake now in online forums and places where people are posting their angry comments about things is some variant of the Y-O-U-R versus Y-O-U''re and similar kinds of there things where a spell check just won't pick it up because you're actually writing a real word. So people are just making those mistakes more and more frequently. Again, as you say, it's automation complacency. I think also another thing that's happening here is there's a generational conversation that's going on around all this stuff. Ooh, I just used around in the way I'm not supposed to. There's a generational conversation going on about this topic that I'll tell you a quick story. So some friends of mine are bringing their daughter to her college, which is in a rural part of Virginia. They have a fully equipped, modern day Volvo or something with all kinds of nav stuff, I'm sure, on board. But they also, just because they're my age and also because, in fact, these things really do have a utility that's separate from all this nav stuff. They've got road maps with them, or they got a road atlas or something like that. And every time they take it out, their daughter yells at them and says, "That's embarrassing. That's stupid. You people are, you're living in the wrong century. Nobody does that anymore. Please don't do that in front of me." There's a real conversation going on about this that really, it seems to have these strange generational stakeholders. I don't know how much you found that in the preparation for this book.
Well, it's definitely true that, young people who grow up with Google Maps or GPS often don't even consider alternatives, whether it's using a paper map or actually trying to figure out where you are on your own. And to me, that kind of shows how quick we are not only to trust computers, but to become dependent on them and to simply say, well, if a computer can get me from point A to point B, then I'll just use the computer and essentially turn off my own navigational sense. And what happens is that we don't develop that sense. And so not only can that cause you trouble if suddenly your GPS misleads you, as still happens, but it also means we don't develop as much a sense of place as we used to. We become so dependent on the machine that we kind of, again, here too, tune out and don't kind of pay attention to landmarks or directions. And so you can go to a new city, walk around with Google Maps all day, leave the city and realize, gee, I don't have any sense of that city at all. So there's lots of different effects that play out. And I think there's a generational angle, but I think that everyone is kind of susceptible to the negatives.
I think everybody's susceptible to the negatives, although one difference is there's a generation that kind of remembers. I mean, I just did a recent trip to Montreal, and it was the same thing. Coming back, we had a nav thing on board in the car. We were very dependent on it. It was telling us certain things. And I sort of remembered a world in which I had a road atlas, and I could look at 3 or 4 ways to cross the Canadian border and sort of think about if I didn't like the way things were or the way traffic was in a certain place, I could go to this other place. You could sort of, I remember that. There's a generation that is coming, that is moving into adulthood now, that simply doesn't remember the alternative, and for them, I think it is a different picture.
Yeah, it's. I mean, in one of the fascinating bits of research I found was comparisons of people when they use computer navigation versus paper maps, and it turns out that using a paper map actually aids you in learning direction, figuring out a new place, and that doesn't happen with a computer map. And the difference is that, with a paper map, you have to actually figure out where am I on this map and where am I going to and what's the route. With a GPS system, it's, go 100 yards, turn right, go another 100, turn left, destination ahead. You don't practice your own wayfinding or navigational skill.
So one of the questions that I had reading the book was that it's clear that these things, these activities, when they're done by a human being figuring things out for him or herself, whether it's driving a car as opposed to an automated car, whether it's the same kind of navigation or pilots, or we know about London cab drivers and their highly developed hippocampi and all that stuff. We know that neuron clusters build up in the brain that are specific to the task, that are they're interlinked networks of neurons that are specific. They help us with this task. If we don't do it that way, we don't develop them. It actually is caused by our doing them. How much transferability is there, though, among those things? In other words, the neuron cluster that I build up by driving a car or driving a car with a stick shift or driving a car and using maps, whatever it is that I'm doing, is it good for anything except the thing that I'm using it for?
Well, I think I think that's a big question in neuroscience in general. How much is a specific skill transferable to other things? But I think it's certainly true that the development of any kind of skill only comes from practice, from hard work, from facing challenges, from grappling with a difficult situation, and that's how we build up those neuronal clusters, which we often refer to as intuition, the intuition of the expert. And so there's a tension between the desire of software programmers to relieve us of effort, to remove those challenges or ease us through challenges, in the fact that it's only by doing hard work in the real world that we develop any kind of talent. And it turns out that it's actually the process of developing talent, in addition to giving us the skill, is actually what we often find most satisfying and most fulfilling about doing anything. So we're in this, we want to give everything over to computers, and yet it leaves us less skilled and I think less satisfied with what we're doing.
Nick Carr, this book, The Glass Cage, brings up a lot of other questions, not all of them confined to the world of neurology and neuroscience, including the whole question of technological unemployment. This is something we're watching unfold. We have questions about it. We've had questions for a long time, though, about this kind of thing, but about whether or not we are going to be rendered less and less necessary. But, every year I see another article saying, well, it just might be the case that enough things are being done by machines and there hasn't been a sufficient amount of invention of other kinds of employment as a result of these new levels of technology, so that fewer people are needed to do any particular work. Where did you come out on all this?
Well, it's certainly true, and it was striking in the research that the same concerns that we feel now about computers stealing our jobs have been felt about other machines for a couple of hundred years now. And those fears did not pan out, because whenever a new labor-saving technology relieved some people of their jobs, they actually created more productivity, which led to the creation of better and bigger sets of jobs. The difference, I think there are signs that what we're going through now is different from what we've seen in the past. And the reason is because computers can take over many, many more types of jobs than can mechanical machines. So not only kind of factory laborers losing their jobs to robots, but lawyers losing their jobs to text analysis software, nurses losing their jobs, or pharmacists losing their jobs to drug allocation kind of software systems. So we've created this new technology that can take over lots more different types of skills and jobs. But what we haven't seen so far with the computer revolution is these brand new big categories of jobs like we saw during the last century. And so we're seeing more and more this kind of loss of middle-class jobs with good wages, and more of a polarization of work into a few people that do very, very well and lots of people who really struggle. Now, that could still resolve itself, and a lot of economists think we just have to wait. But there are other economists now who say this is a real and seemingly persistent problem, that computers can simply take over too many kinds of jobs.
And it does. As I was reading, I was thinking, really, part of the message here is it's good, or much better anyway, to be a shareholder in a company that's making use of automation to streamline itself and to do this kind of work and to make itself more productive and profitable than it is to be a worker. Which also makes you think, it raises kind of equality questions and questions about the nature of the structure of a society. You might be better off in a Scandinavian country that places a lot more emphasis on equality, where they're sort of saying, well, that's really good because everybody can have longer vacations, people can have shorter work hours, you can use this time to do all kinds of other fulfilling things, but if you have a kind of zero-sum society, which is what capitalism in the USA seems like to me right now, it's sort of like, oh, yes, a lot of us will get rich, and a much bigger group of us will simply have nothing to do and no work, and will live in poverty.
And if you look at some of the rhetoric that comes from the technology executives and entrepreneurs who have made billions of dollars, quite literally, from the profit concentrating effects of computer technology and computer automation. You can take things that used to require a lot of people, put them online, and just reap the profits. They often talk about, well, eventually this will lead to a utopia where none of us have to work and we can all, go out in a field and paint watercolors and stuff. And yet it's really hard to imagine our society, even if technologically that turns out to be true, it's very hard to see how we get from where we are to a society where somehow all the wealth is kind of distributed evenly among lots of people. That strikes me as being very, very hard to accomplish. And also, there's also a question, even if we were to accomplish that, would that really be utopia? Because it turns out that there's a lot of psychological studies that show that people actually like to work. They might think they want to be at leisure, but when they have too much time on their hands, they get miserable. And so thinking about a society where there aren't any jobs is probably not a utopia. It's probably a place that not many of us would actually like to live in.
Right. I mean, we might like to live in a place that had more leisure time than we have now. In other words, you look at European countries and their attitudes towards vacation and time off and workday and family leave and all this kind of stuff, and they seem a lot more enlightened. It seems as though what's happened here is either you're part of the 1% or you're part of a group of people who have to work really hard a lot of the time, a lot of hours in order to sustain yourself at all. And you kind of like to find that middle ground anyway, where it actually freed up some leisure time.
And even among the 1%, frankly, one of the ironies of information technology is that people who are working tend to be working more than ever. As long as you have a cell phone on you, even if it's in the evening or you're on vacation, you're kind of tuned in. You're often tuned into your job and still receiving messages. So there's a lot of a lot of things are playing out that aren't exactly what we expected from the computer revolution.
So in this book, we see the frequently dire consequences of this, and I think the most dramatic and dire consequences are these stories, more than one story, of airline pilots who had things automated and then suddenly needed to be on the stick and for some reason or other didn't have the right set of instincts to handle the situation and actually crash the plane. So that's a really scary scenario, and it does seem to have something to do with the overuse of autopilot and the erosion of pilots' skills and instincts. But it seems to me that some of this stuff goes on in a less dramatic, more insidious, but every bit as frightening area. And I think healthcare is a pretty good example. I mean, I'm constantly aware of the fact, even though I have a very good hands-on doctor who, really sort of makes an attempt to have a personal relationship with me and knows what's going on, I'm bombarded with evidence that somehow or other I'm being quantified by a healthcare system that's reading me in certain ways and beginning to deal with me in ways that have nothing to do with ever having met me. So, and I'm assuming that this is sort of how you see some of the dangers of automation in healthcare.
I think that's right. And as doctors are being, particularly primary care physicians, are being required to use computerized, record-keeping systems and so forth, there's a lot of complaints coming from doctors as well as from patients. And what we're seeing, and this is, again, a common theme with automation, is that a lot of the expected benefits that were supposed to come from computerization of medicine, like lowering the costs of healthcare, haven't panned out. But we've seen a lot of unexpected consequences, distancing of the patient and the doctor. Doctors who bring computers into examination rooms end up looking at the screen about 25 to 50% of the time they're with the patient, and that's frustrating to both doctor and patient. But also there seems to be a reduction in the quality of the medical records because doctors start following templates instead of dictating notes. They start cutting and pasting from earlier patient visits, and a lot of doctors now are complaining that when they read through a patient's record, they might be able to get that record quicker because it's online, it's coming through a computer, but when they read through it, the record is less valuable and less rich and less detailed. And so all of these, we're kind of rushing. The federal government has spent like $30 billion to subsidize purchases of electronic medical record systems. And it's only after they're installed we start to realize that this may be intruding into the doctor-patient relationship and even the building of doctor skill in a way that we didn't anticipate. And it underscores that when we automate work, particularly kind of this very subtle, nuanced work of a diagnostician, we need to be very, very careful about how we design the systems, and so far we haven't been very careful.
Are there sort of examples that are the equivalent of the Royal Majesty story? In other words, in the Royal Majesty story, you have a human being, he's supposed to look for the buoy. If he doesn't see the buoy, that means that there's something wrong. I assume the same thing is happening when people look at mammograms or whatever. In other words, are there situations where the computer's telling you one thing, your own lion eyes are telling you something else, and you believe the computer?
Yeah, there are studies of exactly that. Radiologists who use, now all X-rays and other diagnostic images are digitized. So what happens is you can start to bring in software as an aid that gives you prompts, that tells the doctor where should I look on this diagnostic image. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes that focuses the doctor's attention on an area where there is an abnormality. But studies show that it also often has the other effect. The doctor becomes so led by the software and focuses so much in this one area that he or she may miss abnormalities elsewhere in the image. And we see it in the way doctors are communicating as well. There was a new paper out about the gentleman who died of Ebola in Dallas, Thomas Duncan, that does suggest that the computerized record-keeping system, because it was based on templates and checklists and so forth, kind of led the nurses and doctors to the initial misdiagnosis and played a role in that. So there are growing signs that these kinds of systems can get in the way of effective medicine.
So let me just get into one last area with you, Nicholas Carr. But the book, by the way, is called The Glass Cage, Automation and Us. So one of the questions that I had reading the book was, there's sort of two ways that we could be going. One of them is we could be going sort of towards idiocracy. We could either be going to idiocracy or we can be going to Star Trek. So if we're going to idiocracy, that means increasingly important human skills will begin to atrophy, instincts will erode, and in fact, mistakes will almost build on themselves. The errors in judgment we're making now will cause other errors in judgment, which will cause other errors in judgment, and meanwhile, we won't be developing compensatory mental resources in order to deal with all of those errors in judgment, and we'll get really stupid, and a lot of mistakes will get made that shouldn't have been made. Okay, that's scenario one. Scenario two is we're just in transition. We're in a transition right now, and within 10, 15, 20 years, diagnostic computers will be really great. You just step in front of some scanner, and it is like Star Trek. It'll tell you everything about yourself, everything that you really need to know. And we'll have automated cars that can all work with each other to avoid unnecessary traffic jams and accidents, and all of this stuff, whether it's planes, trains, automobiles, healthcare, GPS, whatever it is that's happening right now, will have the bugs worked out of it so that, in fact, we really do get a better world out of automation. What's your reaction when I point to that fork in the road? I mean, it really is possible some of this stuff's going to get a lot better and be not dangerous, if anything, make us safer and happier.
I guess there are two reactions, one pragmatic and one philosophical. The pragmatic one is that we may indeed get a fully automated traffic system, fully automated pilots, fully automated medicine that's foolproof. That's very, very hard to achieve, and it's going to be a long time before we achieve that, if we do. And in the meantime, we're going to have people and computers working together in both routine situations and dangerous situations. So even if a machine utopia lies out ahead of us, we've got a long time where we have to make sure we design systems to maintain human skills as well as get the best out of computers. And the philosophical question is, what's left for us if we do achieve this total automation? And we know that people actually like to build skills and feel fulfilled more when they're challenged in overcoming hard tasks than when they're sitting back and watching computer screens. Even if all our dreams come true, will that actually be a better world for us, for human beings? And that's a trickier question.
Yeah, well, I'm a declinist at heart. So, the book is The Glass Cage, Automation and Us by Nicholas Carr, the always fascinating Nicholas Carr, also the author of The Shallows. We're going to end with, just to make it clear that these anxieties have been around for a while, a song by one of my personal heroes, written probably about 50 years ago, maybe a little bit more than 50 years ago. This is Alan Sherman with Automation.
Was automation, I know, That was what was making the factory go. It was IBM. It was Univac. It was all those gears going clickety-clack, dear. I thought automation was keen till you were replaced by a 10-ton machine. It was that computer that tore us apart, dear. Automation broke my heart.
All right. As I said at the beginning of the show, I think I speak for many people of Connecticut. If we'd known what kind of election this was going to be, we would have gotten on some kind of serotonin reuptake inhibitor that included epinephrine too, and just something really good and complex that could have gotten us through this very difficult time. However, the good news is pretty soon it's going to be over. Tuesday night it will be over. We will be at Real Art Waves. When I say we, John Dankosky joins me in studio right now. He and I will be anchoring WNPR's coverage that night, along with a bevy of analysts and, of course, the greatest radio reporting team ever assembled. But even as we think that this election sliding into an angle of riposte, new things happen all the time. So actually, it's really true. This weekend, I was posting something, writing up a post about sort of surprises for election night, things that could happen. I got it up, I put it on Facebook, and the first commenter said, well, Visconti has just left the race. I said, what? So Joe Visconti, who's the third-party candidate in running essentially a sort of a Second Amendment-oriented campaign, has announced on Sunday that he's dropped out. And you've had some experience interviewing him in the past and asking him, what his overall game plan was. Was he in it to the bitter end?
Yeah, and he said over and over again, I'm going to stay in it until the bitter end. I want to actually try to win this campaign. Now, everyone always says they want to win the campaign. He told me this morning when we talked that he felt like he needed some 400,000 voters supporting him, and he knew he wasn't going to get that. He probably could have known that before, Sunday when he made this announcement. But at the end of the day, he decided over the weekend that it was important for him to throw his support behind Tom Foley. He took a look at one of the 3 or 4 polls that we've seen in the last couple of days, the PPP poll that showed Foley now losing a slight lead to Dan Malloy, and he said, I've got to do something. I got to get into this. I talked to him this morning, Colin. We had a fascinating conversation, as I always do with Joe Visconti. You want to hear a little bit about what he said? So, first of all, we played Joe some tape from when he appeared on Where We Live recently, where he suggested Tom Foley had been asleep and hadn't learned anything since his last race for governor. I asked him if anything had really changed about his feelings for Foley since then. He said he may still be a better candidate, but he's turning things over to Tom Foley.
It got down to one of these things where what's not necessarily the lesser of two evil, but who can actually get us on another course? If it's not going to be me, it has to be Tom. And it gets down to things like that in the moment where you may be the better candidate, you may have the better ideas, and all of that, but the public isn't, they know the major candidates. So with the 2 major candidates, and this is what I looked at when I saw the polls, can we help Tom get over? And I think we can.
I mean, we've seen this kind of thing in the past, where and we most often see it in primary seasons when the primary is resolved, and quite frequently your opponent could even become your running mate. So the person during the primary season whom you've described as inadequate and stupid and engaging in voodoo economics and whatever horrible thing you've branded them with is now the person you're running alongside. So we've seen this before, that over the course of this campaign, Visconti's had very many negative things to say about Tom Foley. But this is sort of a little different 2 days before the election.
Well, it's coming so late, and even just if you listen to what he said, Tom's not necessarily the lesser of two evils. This is not a ringing endorsement that is coming forth from Joe Visconti. And, of course, another thing that happened is we look at this latest Quinnipiac poll, which I know we want to get into, Colin. There have been all of these polls in the last couple of days, and I think this is an important piece. One of the reasons Joe Visconti is leaving the race is because he thinks that he's going to throw support now to Tom Foley. But if you look at the way this Quinnipiac poll shapes up, he's still polling 8% in a three-way race, about 4% of support coming from folks on the Democratic side, meaning pulling from Dan Malloy, about 5% from Republicans. It's it actually seems in some ways, Colin, like he could be pulling from both places. He's leaving the race might not even help all that much.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a long time, Visconti has been sort of a Monopoly game free parking spot. If you're unhappy with both of your choices, you could think about voting for Joe Visconti. You could tell a pollster if you're uncomfortable, if you're upset with Governor Malloy, but you also don't fancy Tom Foley, you have... and I think people, for some reason or other, don't like to say, and maybe they don't like to do it either, I'm going to leave that line blank. I'm going to vote in all the other races, but I'm just simply not going to color in any circle there. For some reason or other, people don't like that. So I think one of the things they've been doing with Joe Visconti is to say, I'm voting for him because I don't like the other two choices. And one thing we have to emphasize is there is nothing now that would stop anybody from doing exactly that tomorrow.
Well, of course, another thing that we need to take into consideration is even though there's not a very easy absentee ballot system in Connecticut, a number of people have already cast absentee ballots for Joe Visconti. And so I asked him, what do you say to all those people who've already thrown a lot of support behind you, maybe a few dollars? They've already cast a vote for you, and now you say you're dropping out of the race.
Yeah, well, that's part of the process when you watch what's happening in this race, very tight race in a dogfight. As a candidate, as a person, they're going to need to trust my decision. I just couldn't sit here and watch myself not help the better of the two candidates get in, and I had to make a call because the polls were sliding against him, and maybe it's not enough. Maybe it isn't going to be enough.
To me, anyway, I mean, my own reaction to this has been that I actually thought he was sort of an important force in this campaign season. It's simply because so often it seemed as though Foley and Malloy weren't adequately engaging with significant issues and debates. They weren't taking good care of the process. I was very hopeful that John Pelto also would qualify for a ballot position and then participate in the debates. I thought it was useful and helpful to a certain degree when Visconti participated in the debates. But it seems to me this is a very odd situation, and to have clamored the way that he did to be in debates and to be upset when he wasn't included in debates, and suddenly in this very abrupt fashion to announce that he's dropping out in a way that I'm not persuaded at all will help Tom Foley. A, for the reason that you mentioned, that he seems to pull from both camps. Also, I just don't think people can straighten this thing out in their minds fast enough. I mean, I've never seen anybody drop out 2 days before an election, but I think you're just sort of still on the ballot and people vote for you.
He said something sort of funny to me. He said, we're not going to try to get my name off the ballots everywhere because I don't think that's really possible. Denise Merrill, the Secretary of the State, has affirmatively said, no, that's not possible. And with all the problems that we've had with ballots in places like Bridgeport in the past, probably not advisable to try to get his name off the ballot. So he will indeed be there. Real quick, Colin, one of the things that he really has been clamoring about is that neither of the two candidates have, as you say, been specific about very key things. For instance, Governor Malloy is saying there's not a deficit coming in the next few years. We've taken care of that. There's no deficit. Tom Foley has not necessarily said that, but he hasn't really talked much about the deficit and hasn't talked about how he'll deal with it. So essentially, Joe Visconti is saying the next governor, Republican or Democrat, is probably going to have to raise taxes. So I asked him about that. So you think a Governor Tom Foley would have to raise taxes to get out of this budget deficit?
I don't know how we can grow, and this is truthful, I don't know how we can cut enough, even if the legislature agreed with it, and mothball enough programs for us not to have some form of a tax increase unless we grow completely out of it in a miracle situation. I don't see it happening. And I see someone having to do something. Again, these are the things I didn't speak with Tom Foley about, but we will press him when he's governor.
Well, I mean, maybe he could have, because in fact, I do think the debate that you moderated, in particular, Joe Visconti said things about the budget that were clearer and to my way of thinking, more true than either candidate has said. Another thing that I learned from the debate that you moderated and now from this latest development is it doesn't really make any sense to wildly flatter another person under these circumstances, because Dan Malloy spent huge amounts of the time that he's been on stage with Joe Visconti telling Joe Visconti what a wonderful person he is, what a good man he is, and how, although they disagree, he thinks Joe Visconti is wonderfully honest. And so his reward for that is a gift-wrapped prize on his doorstep this morning of Joe Visconti saying that Dan Malloy is such an awful successful candidate, and that he really feels as though he has to wholeheartedly support Tom Foley.
So. Well, at least half-heartedly support Tom Foley. Now, another thing to mention here, Colin, is you had moderated a debate, the CBA debate, that only two of the candidates were in, Foley and Malloy. I moderated a debate in which all three candidates were there, and it was the only time all three candidates were there. Then we had the very odd situation of Tom Foley sitting out one of the debates. We had the final debate of the debate season over this past weekend, and of course, Mark Davis from WTNH had what they called a little bit of a forum. It wasn't exactly a debate in the normal sense, and they're sitting in kind of comfy chairs, and it's on a Sunday morning. And I have to say, as odd as this entire campaign season has been, this may have been even the oddest thing we've seen yet.
Yeah, this has come up a few times before, that Tom Foley has this boat. He has a boat. It's a yacht, and it's called the Odalisque. And the Odalisque has that word has a history, and it really did mean a woman in a harem or a concubine, something along those lines. And so, I guess do we have audio of this?
Yeah, we just have a very short clip. This is Tom Foley addressing this issue. Dan Malloy actually made reference because of a question that was asked. Each of them had owned boats at one point. Dan Malloy doesn't have his boat anymore, and Dan Malloy made reference to the fact that Tom Foley's boat is called the same thing as a sex slave.
Odalisque really means a beautiful woman, a beautiful thing in the art world. It doesn't mean a sex slave.
I just found it funny because our own Ray Hardman has been doing a story about how neither of the two candidates is really engaged in the idea of arts and tourism and culture as an economic driver. They really don't talk about it at all. And now, just a few days before the campaign, they're talking about classical art and the term odalisque.
And I was gonna mention this to you off the air, but I feel as though I could get a much better handle on this if I could go to the Louvre and look at Jean-Auguste Dominique Ang's Grand Odalisque, which is probably the ultimate classic Odalisque painting.
I can just put it on the credit card
right now.
I was just going to say,
if you could
zoom
just
over
put
there,
that,
that's fine.
Put an expense form in, I would go look at that and I think get some resolution in my mind. Very quickly here, before we have to go, we should just quickly mention we are doing this thing on election night.
Yes.
We will be at Real Artways. We'll start on the air at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, 7 o'clock all the way until 10 o'clock, and that's kind of a question mark there because it may indeed go longer if what has happened in the past happens once again. This is a very close race that may indeed go past 10 o'clock. What we're going to have there, Colin, is we're going to have analysts, we're going to have reporters, we're going to have a whole bunch of fun hipsters having a good election night time. We're going to have some interesting events going on there, including a live band. There's actually some sort of a cat exhibit we've had to work around, so there's actually going to be live cats. It's probably one of the dumbest things I've ever said yes to ever, but yet it's going to be enormously fun at Real Artways from 7 to 10. NPR coverage included, and then NPR coverage goes on all night on WNPR after that.
So just to be clear about that, you're invited to join us at Real Artways in person, and yes, we have
no cover charge.
We've got all kinds of interesting people who will be there.
If you're allergic to cats, maybe stay home.
Dan Brady Mayor Mark Boughton making his debut as one of our Republican political analysts. That should be especially exciting. But if you decide not to join us in person, we'll be on the air, just regular airwaves, starting at 7. We'll also be streamable online, and our online team, led by Heather Brandon, is also going to be putting together special online textual coverage.
We'll have all sorts of stuff online. It's WNPR.org, so you can follow us all night long, not just for the governor's race, but we're also going to be making sure that you know what's going on with the Senate race around the country from us and from NPR, too.
What we're trying to tell you is you really don't need anybody else.
No, we're everything.
We'll take all of your needs.
Everything that you could possibly need.
All right, we're going to take a break. Thank you, John Dankosky.
You're welcome.
And we will be back after this to talk about, have you been to the movie theaters lately, and why not? And is there anything they could do to get you to come?
I'm gonna get good luck back. I've had it with hard luck black. I've had it with taking flack. I've had being used. I'm gonna get good luck back. I'm gonna get back on track. I'm gonna be where it's at, wherever I choose. I'm gonna get all.
And we're back. And let me quickly tell you that Kyone Wolf is out with a cold today. That's why you're not hearing Kyone Wolf. I have to thank Betsy Kaplan, who's done an amazing job pulling this whole show together. And whoever's on the phones over there, Jackie Filson or Josh, I don't know, I can't even see. Some outstanding intern has helped us out. Our tweet master, Greg Hill, is at WNPR Colin. He's tweeting for us. You may tweet back at him. And there's Katie Tolarski's our executive producer. The part of Bill Curry today was played by Joe Visconti. That was, by the way, I made a huge mistake, which is as we were going out, there was music going out. That was Joe Visconti singing. He's a Renaissance man. So it's time to stop thinking about politics and more time to start thinking about going to the movies. We're heading into sort of the season of Oscar releases. You may be tempted to go and see all the Oscar-worthy movies in the movie theater. You may be ready to go see Birdman, but you also may hesitate. There may be some reason you feel as though the movie theater isn't the place for you anymore. I think a lot of us have had that feeling for various reasons. Joining us right now is Chris Ostendorf. He's a freelance writer in L.A. He wrote a terrific piece for the Daily Dot about the crisis facing movie theater owners in terms of attracting a new audience, and also the fact that they are now offering different kinds of experiences. It really kind of depends on where you go, what kind of theater it is. So, Chris Ostendorf, I'm going to sort of hand things off to you. I guess the first thing to say is it feels like this is a semi-regular conversation, that from time to time somebody, some critic or somebody like me announces movie theaters are in trouble, people aren't going, it costs too much, they have home theater systems where they can control their environment much better. And then there's like some big, huge blockbuster summer and somebody else announces, no, movie theaters are fine. You're wrong. People still go to the movies. But you did see some evidence that there might be a reason for theater owners to rethink their paradigm a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I mean, personally, I think, like you said, this is a conversation that gets brought up kind of again and again, or at least it has through the past few years from the Toronto Film Festival incident. I mentioned where there's a guy a critic who calls 911 during a screening because someone's talking, or you have the incident, I think, 2008, where someone is shot because they're talking in a movie theater, or the Alamo Drafthouse voicemail that sort of went viral a few years ago that I also mentioned.
Let's just pause and mention that one, because that's I had not, until I read your article, I had not known that one. So this is at the Alamo chain. A young woman, the Alamo chain in particular, they really do have a problem with people texting, people with just glowing cell phone screens in their movie theaters, and they warn people that they're going to be kicked out if they do it. And this is a woman who had been kicked out. We would play the audio of this, but it's full of profanities. It's a voicemail that she leaves for the Alamo Theater management saying all she was doing is like she was trying to do this, she's trying to do that, and they treated her horribly, and why did they throw her out? And they now run this thing as an announcement before their movies as a kind of comical way of telling people, yeah, this is what we're going to do. We're going to throw your butt out if you're looking at your phone.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the Alamo Drafthouse did there is definitely emblematic of sort of what they stand for as a theater, and sort of a business model that a lot of other theaters are sort of starting to adopt, although not many that strictly. I remember I had a lot of conversations when that first emerged a few years ago with fellow film lovers, and there is almost a certain level of pretentiousness or a certain level of obnoxiousness in terms of taking this voicemail and kind of using it to prop their theater up and, talk about how great they are and how seriously they take themselves. That being said, I think having experienced Alamo Drafthouse, it really is a phenomenal theater, and that's part of what you're paying for when you go there. Like I said, they'll do participation nights where you're encouraged to talk at the screen and enjoy an experience like that. However, I do think, that voicemail, it should let you know they take this stuff very seriously, the talking, the texting. And I think, again, it comes down to that's part of what you're paying for when you go to that theater.
I think one of the most effective things that I've seen as a movie goer, I'm located here in Connecticut, but when I'm in New York, one theater I go to a lot on Houston Street, I think it's called the Landmark Sunshine Theater. And one of the things that they do is before any movie starts, a human being walks into the movie theater. I mean, this is a multiplex, multi-screen place, but a human being walks down and makes some announcements and basically, greets everybody and sort of says something about, maybe even what the movie is, or and then makes some of those announcements about not talking or texting and using cell phones and things like that. And you suddenly feel, even though the human being is, 21 years old and living with his parents, or I mean, who knows? It's a person who is saying something to you about the establishment's commitment to a certain level of behavior from the audience and a certain quality of the movie-going experience. And I think it actually penetrates people in a way that maybe nothing you could put up on the screen ever would.
Yeah, I 100%, I 100% feel the same way. There is something about putting a human face to it that I think makes people take it more seriously. Plus, it just kind of reinforces the idea that I think, hey, you're at the movies with other people. There are other people who are going to be experiencing this too, and especially depending on the movie, it's important to really respect that and be polite. I happen to actually love that. There's something almost sort of wonderfully antiquated about that notion. This person who comes in and makes a few announcements at a time. I remember ArcLight Cinemas here in Los Angeles. They do the same thing. I remember going to see Boyhood and someone coming up ahead of time and saying, "I've seen this movie 3 times. That's 9 hours of my life." And after making an announcement like that, and he goes through and he does the whole no texting or talking thing, it's like, clearly, this person took this movie seriously enough to see it 3 times. Hopefully we can all, see it 1 time and, respect each other enough to be polite through the experience.
Well, and, we began our show today with Nicholas Carr, whose new book is called The Glass Cage. It's about automation. And the other experience that you have in movie theaters now is if there's something goes wrong with the projection equipment, it is quite frequently the case, if you're at a big multiplex, that there's no one on the premise who's making more than $12 an hour, and there's certainly nobody there who has any idea of what to do about the projector. That's all automated. It's operated by computer codes. The nearest technician who could do anything about it may be 100 miles away. And I think that's frustrating to people, too. It sends the message to them, I'm not in a very important place. I'm not in a place that curates its cultural materials very well. And so I can talk and be an idiot and text my friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is sadly sort of indicative of at least some American multiplexes. And I have to admit, there's a sense in which, for me, sound and picture problems drive me far crazier, at times than talking or texting. And, it's true, there's not really a lot you can do about it. You can go out and you can say something to someone and, you should definitely not be rude because whoever you're going to be talking to, it's certainly not their fault. But, like you said, it may be a problem with the machine. There's no one who can even get there to fix it in the vicinity. And, it is sort of sadly, that's why, there are, I think, more and more luxury theater chains popping up to offer an experience where, you may even, that's frequently a message you get sometimes for these movies. Someone will come out and they'll say, I'm going to stand up to the side and monitor sound and picture quality. And that's not to say that necessarily they could do anything either if there were issues. But I think it says to the audience, like, look, again, what you're paying for here is an experience where we take what we're showing seriously, and, we're going to try to uphold the quality of that.
Chris, last question that we have before we have to go. Chris Ostendorf, a freelance writer in L.A., wrote this article for the Daily Dot. You have these new luxury theaters, and they often have rather elaborate food opportunities, things that you can bring to your seat that are not just popcorn but actual meals. You can get wine. You can get other things. Does this – the fear I think that a lot of people have is, this will once again cultivate a moviegoer who's kind of indifferent to the movie. If I'm sitting there eating my cheeseburger or God knows what, how likely is it that I'm focused on the movie? Did you sort of get a sense of how that's working out?
I think that's a really interesting point. I know, going back to the Draft House again, I know some people have said they find it almost ironic that they're so worried about distraction when they're a theater that have waiters basically coming in and out to deliver food frequently. Again, personally, I think it comes down to the business model of the theater. Food can certainly be a distraction at the movies, and anyone who's ever sat near a loud eater knows this to be the case. Not that there's really anything you can do about that. However, I think with certain theater chains, there are certain theater chains who do a good job making the theater nice enough, amenities, better seating, choose your seat ahead of time, that kind of suggests, hey, this is something to be taken seriously. So even if you are walking in with a bucket of food, that there's at least some semblance of respect.
Perfect place to end. Chris Ostendorf, we absolutely have to go. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to everyone who listened. We'll be back tomorrow. It'll be Election Day. God help us all.